So today we're going to be talking about data centers and in particular some ongoing legislation at the State House to address ongoing data center development and establish some guardrails for responsible data center development in Maine. This is something that's been happening in a lot of other states, and Maine has been slower to see some of these development proposals, largely because of electricity prices in Maine being some of the highest in the nation. But we are seeing some of these proposals, and we're going to talk to you over the next few minutes about what we're doing about it, especially up at the State House as we enter the last couple of weeks of the legislative session here. So here's our climate and clean energy team. Jack and I are going to be joining you today as presenters and facilitators. Um, Rebecca is a regular on these calls, but will not be on for this one, but is over at the Public Utilities Commission regularly advocating for energy affordability and building out the smart electric grid that we need to power a clean energy future. If this is your first climate action call with us, this is a call that we hold monthly. The first Thursday of every month, we bring folks together. It's a more discussion-oriented call. We really give you a peek under the hood into what we're working on at that given moment, and then always conclude with an opportunity for you to take action and participate with us. So we enjoy questions. We'll have a big question and answer portion. If you have questions throughout the course of the presentation, go ahead and put those in the chat, and then we'll get to them during that Q&A portion. But we're excited that we have a lot of folks on the call, but we do have these every month and would love for you to continue to join us to talk about our climate and clean energy future here in Maine. Here's what we're going to be looking at. As I mentioned, this is really going to be focused on data centers, but we are going to start with an important note about the global energy picture, which I'm sure, as you all know, is another thing that has been very much in the news of late. Then we'll talk a little bit more about data centers and finish out with some opportunities for action for all of you to take action with us as we enter the last couple of weeks at the State House here. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jack, and you can take it away.
All right. Thanks, Josh. And thanks everyone for being here. Just really, really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us once a month. For everyone who's new, welcome. For all you returning attendees, thanks for taking your time to be with us. So yeah, like Josh said, while we're going to talk about data centers today, did want to touch on, what's really a pretty urgent and newsworthy topic that's really relevant to our work on climate and clean energy in Maine, which is the war in Iran and the global energy impacts that we're seeing from that. We did put up a short blog about this on the energy impacts of the Iran war on energy costs in Maine. I can drop that in the chat in a minute. Josh, if you have it, maybe you can as well. But just wanted to talk through some of it briefly. Um, so what's going on is in short, since the conflict in Iran began at the end of February, the Iran has closed ship traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, which is basically the exit of the Persian Gulf. It's a narrow strait. It makes this like big curve and is really exposed to any ships that are going through there are really exposed to attack should that be something that has happened. And so we've seen tanker and freighter traffic just absolutely drop to almost nothing. And this is important because about 20% of the world's oil supply and a lot of other things come in tankers through that waterway. Um, so that has created this enormous supply shortfall. Basically, the world uses about 100 million barrels of oil a day. And now there's only about 80 million barrels coming onto the market every day. So that some of that's being met by stuff that's in storage or tankers that were already on the ocean or releases of reserves. But oil markets and oil economics are really complicated. But this is already starting to have a major impact around the world on energy costs, and that includes in Maine. Um, so how does this land on the ground here in Maine? Number one is, I mean, these are not in any particular order, but one is gas prices. I think people have already seen, gas prices have jumped by about $1 since the beginning of the conflict. That impacts a ton of people's, sort of weekly, monthly budgets, especially low income folks who spend more of their income on energy, including transportation. Diesel has also fuel has also gone up. Um, that is a big deal because it affects the cost of everything that goes by truck, and some 80-90% of the all the goods that we buy is transported by truck. So that's going to have some serious price impacts. There was a story a few days ago about loggers are being affected, farmers are being affected, anyone using equipment. Heating oil, chemically very similar to diesel, also has jumped up. Somewhat fortunately, we're sort of towards the end of heating season here in Maine, but we don't know how long these kinds of disruptions are going to go on. And we're seeing heating oil at near record highs. And the last one is electricity. About 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas comes out of the Persian Gulf. Most of the natural gas methane that we use in power plants in New England is pipeline gas. But the global gas market also does have some effects on these overall costs as well. So we did see natural gas prices be the primary driver of cost increases over the past several years, especially with other disruptions from the war in Ukraine a few years ago. So it's likely that we're going to be seeing that effect as well, although on somewhat of a delay. So this is a situation that will continue to develop. The ramifications of the closing of the strait are really almost endless. The Gulf is also a big aluminum supplier, so anything that has aluminum in it, including solar panel frames, will have higher costs. Fertilizer is made from natural gas for the most part, so higher costs for food are coming. Helium, critical industrial gas for making microchips. We saw a microchip shortage during the COVID pandemic. We could see that again. And just here in Maine, we're hearing stories about towns delaying fixing potholes because asphalt prices are way up. So just I think, another critical reminder of sort of the precariousness especially from the energy perspective, running most of our economy on fuels that have to be imported every day, and that's something really that's being increasingly recognized all around the world. So with that all being said, we can return to our other thorny issue, which is data centers. Um, so data centers, just to sort of like zoom all the way out, data centers of one form or another have been around for decades. They may have been where your first email server was actually located. It's where website hosting companies kept their equipment. Generally for most of the history of information technology, data centers were pretty innocuous. But that has changed as the AI boom has come along. There has been a real increase in data centers to support the development of new artificial intelligence models. And some of the data centers used for AI training in particular can be absolutely enormous. Now, here in Maine, as Josh mentioned at the top of the call, we haven't really seen data center proposals of the number or scale that have been floated or even constructed elsewhere, like in Northern Virginia, which is a notable hotspot for this kind of development, and elsewhere. But even what could be considered a modestly sized AI data center could bring some really sizable impacts in Maine, given our state's small size, if we don't create the right policy framework around it. So, what are some of those impacts? And you can go to the next slide here, Josh, which is, there are a number of things to talk about. Just to highlight a few, the first thing is that these facilities use an absolute ton of electricity. And if that electricity isn't supplied with new supplies of renewable energy, the result is going to be continued higher demand for fossil fuel plants, the increased costs that come along with that supply, and the emissions that come along with that as well. The second thing is that and this is sort of what this graphic is getting at here on the slide. This is one of the biggest capital investment waves since the railroads were built at the end of the 19th century. Um, it is an enormous boom, and the other side of a boom can be a bust. And so these facilities, if they're sort of built, as new sort of greenfield developments, are going to require a lot of grid infrastructure to support them, to get that electricity to them to serve the specific power needs that they have. And if some of these projects are proposed, the grid infrastructure is put in place, that goes into our rates, and then these facilities go bust, then ratepayers, all of us really, are going to be the ones left on the hook if any of these investments turn out to be speculative. And then the last piece is that, on this call, we're going to mostly stay focused on the climate and energy issues related to data centers, but there's also a whole ton of other things around water use. These servers that are in the data centers need cooling, land use, other local impacts, and things like that. Next slide, Josh, please. So with all those potential impacts being noted, there is a potential opportunity to get some of this development right, with the right framework around it, with the right guardrails in place. Because as a general principle, new electricity load can spread system costs more broadly, which means that everyone pays a little bit of a lower rate. Um, and that's what's behind what we've talked about on these calls before, which is beneficial electrification, right? That's heat pump adoption, electric vehicle adoption with managed charging, other ways that we are increasing electricity load, but in so doing, spreading the cost of the system more broadly. So if data center developers are required to pay the cost of their own grid upgrades, um, it is possible for ratepayers to have net benefits. Specific requirements for community benefits agreements can ensure that the local communities hosting these projects could benefit. If we put in place rigorous greenhouse gas accounting and standards, require bringing new clean energy resources in the policy space. Bring your own new clean energy. The acronym is Beyonce, which is fun. But that requirement that you're not just sort of sucking power out of the grid, but you're being required to facilitate the development of new clean energy, that's really important to avoiding climate impacts. Um, and I think specifically for Maine, if the incentives and requirements are right, these projects could potentially help underwrite the creation of the kind of demand side market that we need to leverage clean energy technologies like EV charging, like heat pumps and smart thermostats, home batteries, and other distributed resources to help match the data center supply, but also just sort of create that market where we can overall help match supply and demand in the 100% renewable grid that we're trying to build. Next slide, Josh. And this brings us to LD 307. So this is a bill that's in the legislature right now. It was introduced by Representative Melanie Sachs from Freeport, the House Chair of the EUT committee. And what this would do is put a pause on data center development, and during that pause, create a Maine Artificial Intelligence Data Center Coordination Council at the State Department of Energy Resources. And what that council would do is get through the policy framework that we need to have. Um, our view of this bill is that it is a really thoughtful proposal. The charge that's given to the council in the legislation is really comprehensive. Um, And we think that this is the right approach because, we as NRCM are not opposed to all data center development, but there are some significant risks that come along with especially some of these larger scale projects. So it's really, really important for ratepayers, for our clean energy transition, to make sure that we are getting all of this right. So the bill's currently in the House. There are some developers with existing projects that have asked to be exempted from the pause. One of these is a proposal at the former paper mill site in Jay. That project is relatively small, all things considered. It'll use the existing grid infrastructure, and it's sort of part of the brownfield cleanup there. There are a few other amendments being considered, so this is all very much alive conversation. But in our view, overall, 307 is a really vital piece of legislation. So we're supporting its passage to make sure that we do get this development right, and we sort of manage the risks that come with this in the right way. So I will stop there. I've talked enough. I'm going to pass it back over to Josh to talk about some of the other bills that are still in play as we wrap up the legislative session in the next couple of weeks and take us on to the Q&A. So Josh, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I'm excited for the Q&A, but before we jump into that, I do want to talk about some of the bills in particular that we've talked about on these calls over the past couple of months that are still in play at the State House. As I mentioned, April 15th is the statutory adjournment date this year. We're hoping that they get their work done by that time so that we can all go enjoy places like this, the colored Gold Coast. So our other legislative priorities that we're really tracking, some of them we are able to celebrate, haven't quite gotten signed into law yet, but we are excited about their prospects. Others we're still working diligently on getting passed and funded. One in that latter category is the Climate Superfund Bill, LD 1870. And if you've been on calls with us before, you've likely heard about this. But this is the bill to hold climate polluters accountable for climate damages they've caused in Maine. Those climate polluters being the massive multinational fossil fuel corporations that are responsible for climate change more so than any other entities globally. In order to get this bill passed, LD 1870, we are taking a segmented approach. The first critical step to establishing a climate superfund for Maine and actually accruing funding from climate polluters to put towards climate resilience projects in Maine is to do an assessment, a statewide assessment of climate damages in Maine to see what the climate impacts in Maine have really been and associate an economic value with that number. That's a really critical step. It's a study, an assessment that will probably take over a year to actually do. And so this bill is really critical. We have to pass this bill and fund this bill in order to understand what impact climate change has had on Maine so that we can send that bill then to those who have caused that climate damage. Exciting news, the bill did pass the Senate and the House in its initial engrossment votes, 19-13 in the Senate, 75-72 in the House. It was a squeaker, and it set the stage for a House debate that was really illuminating. And I would encourage folks to actually go watch it. All House debates are actually televised. You can go back and record that. But basically, it really exemplified to us that we have some great climate champions who are able to speak to the need to act on climate change, to hold polluters accountable. And we also have a lot of opposition that is still really clinging to climate denial as a primary tactic to try to shut down climate action and initiatives. So while this bill has passed, we are hoping it gets enacted today. It needs funding in order to be implemented, and it needs $600,000. And this always happens in the second part of the legislative session, but it's tight on the appropriations table, and so our appropriators need to make space to fund this important bill. So our key ask right now, and we'll get to this in our take action section, is to fund LD 1870 to make sure that it goes into law. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in the take action section. The other two bills I just want to highlight quickly are LD 838 and LD 1730. LD 838 was initially going to be a proposal to create a transmission authority that could be publicly financed to help de-risk some of these large transmission projects with public dollars. What it has developed into is actually a study to explore the financing and ownership of electric transmission and generation in the state. So you'll remember that last year we established the Department of Energy Resources, which was a huge win from last year's session through LD 1868, or through LD 1270, apologies. That department is now tasked with doing a study to explore how public financing could reduce costs for our clean energy build out. So that's a huge step in the right direction. LD 1730 is one that you've probably also heard about. This is a really exciting one. This legalizes plug-in solar. So these small balcony solar units that are popular in places like Germany and recently in Utah that just passed a similar law that were previously illegal to install on your own. But this is simply a 400-watt unit, relatively small solar panel that you can go ahead and plug into your wall outlet without needing an interconnection agreement with your utility. So really making it more accessible these affordable small solar units to offset electricity costs. So we're really excited to see that pass. It does also need to be signed into law, but we think we're on the right track there. And if you tuned in 2 climate action calls ago, I also just want to say we focused on a bill 2037 to continue Maine's participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. That bill did pass and was signed into law, so Maine is continuing to be a part of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and accruing all the benefits therein, so we can celebrate that as well. So I think largely I'm hoping to be celebrating at the end of the session. We do need this final push on 1870 and on 307, this data center bill. So that's going to be our call to action for folks who are tuning in today. The 2 things that we really want you to do, if you are able, is to urge your legislator to pass and fund LD 1870. That's the critical piece. We need this bill to be funded, and to support LD 307. As Jack mentioned, there's some contention right now around what is going to be included in an exemption or not in LD 307. To us, it is really critical that this bill passes and that a coordinating council is established so that effective guardrails can be set up for future AI data center development. So please encourage your legislator to ensure that 307 passes. The last thing I just want to draw your attention to, as I mentioned, we are getting close to the end of session. The last opportunity for you to tune in with NRCM to learn about any actions that you can take at the end of the session is at our end of session virtual action hour, which is going to be next week. And I think this says Thursday, April 7th. I think it intended to be Tuesday, April 7th. So I apologize. That's a typo on the slide there. But Tuesday, April 7th at noon, you can join us for a final action opportunity to get an update on some of the bills that we maybe didn't mention on this call quite as much, including LD 2141, which is a bill to conserve Maine's lands and waters using unclaimed bottle funding deposits. Okay. Here's some ways to get in touch and to keep in touch. I'm your contact if you have any questions after this call, or if you want to find out more ways to get involved, more ways to take action. Check us out online. We send out an email after every call with a recording of the call and some of the links, such as the blog that Jack referenced about the war in Iran and its impact on energy prices, and our blog on data centers and our perspective on data centers. So we'll send that out after the fact. Lastly, we are a membership organization, and we rely on small dollar donors to keep us moving. So we would encourage you to become members of the Natural Resources Council of Maine if you haven't already. And thank you to those who have. And I see a lot of faces out there that are members of ours. So with that, I'm going to take down the sharing so that we can all look at each other's faces. If you want to jump on camera so that we can see your face and have a little community conversation here. I see that we already have some questions queuing. So Bill, you can go ahead and take it away and fire your first question.
Yeah, on LD 307, I talked to my representative, and he said he would vote for it, provided there was an exemption for the J facility. Um, but is that exemption for J also tied up with Sanford? Do they have to go together, or can they be split?
They, I mean, the amendment can be as specific as it wants to be. So it doesn't have, they don't have to be together. My sense from speaking with people and also from hearing some more of the details about the projects is that the J project is much more well formed and further along. Um, and also more modestly sized. The Sanford project is really sort of still in the scoping phase as far as I can tell. And so I think would be more appropriate to be developed under the kinds of guidance that the council that 307 provides. So I would not be excited about an exemption for Sanford on the criteria of potential ratepayer impacts, greenhouse gas impacts, or other things. They mentioned that they were going to be that their intention was to build a 300 megawatt natural gas fuel cell power plant to power the facility with a sort of long-term objective of using green hydrogen for that fuel cell. That to me feels
That's
not
BS.
so solid.
That ain't gonna
Um,
happen. That ain't gonna happen this century.
um, so I think, but on the other hand, um, the the J project, is sized to be, sort of well within the existing grid infrastructure. They're also taking down about 150 megawatts of natural gas boilers that were part of the mill and putting up 150 megawatts of solar. Solar and natural gas operate sort of differently in terms of their energy supply, so there would still be grid supply that's needed there, but electrons would be needed, but like the physical infrastructure is already sufficient there. So I think they're really like you're talking about sort of two completely different kinds of things. Um, and Jay being on a brownfield as well is also, I think, is a consideration too. So yeah, the short answer to your question is that also, I guess I would say our sense is that the balance in the legislature is sympathetic to Jay, but really maybe a little less interested in Sanford being included as far as I can tell so far. But things the tides shift quickly sometimes in the building, so we never really know for sure. But that's what I know so far.
Just
Thank
two
you.
quick things to tack onto that. The governor has been public that she feels the need for an exemption for the J project. So she's been out there saying that that is something that is a criteria for her. So to have her sign it into law, it might be the case that exemption is needed. Our anticipation is that there would be two floor amendments, one with a J exemption, one with a Sanford exemption. And we think that the floor amendment with the J exemption is likely the one that will have legs and will pass into law with hopefully bipartisan support, in fact, because several Republicans supported this bill out of committee as well. So not a short answer to that question, but we are going to be doing quite a bit of work on this over the next couple of weeks in the halls. Daniel.
Thank you. Um, I, this is a general question that may have no answer because it calls for speculation, sort of on the federal level, but I hope I can articulate it. Given the obvious energy needs of expanding data centers, and given the current administration's love affair with AI, and the current administration's hatred of renewable energy, do you think the data center pressure and the realities of energy needs will allow a shift potentially more in favor of supporting renewable projects like offshore wind? Um, or, or is that just pie in the sky?
Um, I think um, at least on energy, on issues related to energy. we have not seen the this federal administration burdened by considerations of consistency, uh, Daniel. So I'll just leave that there.
Yeah. Okay. That's sort of what I thought you might say, but I just didn't know if anybody had any inside track on changes in thought in there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And I see three questions from Kat, Sam, and Jill. So we're going to go in that order. Judy, I see your request for a raised hand as well. So Judy will be after Jill. Go for it, Kat.
Oh, thanks, Josh. Yeah, I put a few links in the chat regarding the data centers that are being planned for Maine. Sanford is actually going to try to be an Amazon Web Services, which is a huge task, and they're talking 100 times more energy than either Jay or Loring will use in the beginning. Loring will get their energy from Canada through natural gas and hydroelectric, but the J Center and the J Center has some sort of arrangement with CMP. And they do have a closed landfill on site, and Municipal Waste Hub has acquired the facility for construction and demolition debris in the wastewater treatment plant. So what's left over, I guess, will be for a data center. I have no idea how they're going to accomplish that. The whole place looks rather gloomy, but being a brownfield site isn't really a bad thing because, solar panels and data centers aren't going to be polluting anything more than what's already there. So you're not sacrificing virgin land like Sanford, which is a huge undertaking. And it's owned by a Texas businessman who's in the oil and natural gas business. He also owns the electric company, and he also is the developer. So he's got three irons in this fire. And they're building some sort of project out in the Midwest, which is costing billions of dollars. So he's owned this property for over 52 years and has never been able to make a go of it. He's tried to make it into an oil refinery, a casino, an amusement park, among others. And so it's obviously he's desperate to get his investment back, and he's in his 70s, and he, which I got nothing against. I'm narrowing in on 70 myself, so, but I can understand his sense of urgency. And there's also an article that I'll post in a second about 27 legislators who have been targeted for opposing 307, and Senator Harrington is behind all of this down in Sanford.
Yeah, the senator in Sanford.
Yeah, he's been pushing hard for Sanford and trying to use Jay and Loring as the exemption rule because they say it was underway. And he didn't even bring this up until the first work session when moratorium was brought up in the First Amendment by Melanie Sachs. And they did take artificial intelligence out of the title. So Jack, you and I think, had some impact on that amendment because we also included, well, anyway, you can read it. Go to the paper, status page, and you can read all the testimonials.
Yeah.
But it's like, data centers are data centers are data centers. But Amazon Web Services, that's a huge thing because our 3-ring binder is not set up for industrial use. It's set up for residential and business use. And if you don't know what the 3-ring binder is, that's the core infrastructure for our internet access. So if you put an Amazon Web Services center down at the beginning of the 3-ring binder in southern Maine, that's going to effectively close off a lot of bandwidth for the state, I think. I'm not sure. I mean, it'd be nice if Andrew Butcher. You could probably ask him that question.
Yeah, thank you for that, Kat. I think that's a lot of good insights. I think not all proposals are built the same, certainly. And I think I want it to be clear too, as it pertains to the exemption that is being considered for Jay, that it's not just a free and clear exemption. It would be a very tight set of criteria around which Jay would have to meet in order to ensure that it can move forward in alignment with this bill while this council is set up to establish secure guardrails that would then apply to every future development proposal. For the sake of time, I'm going to jump over to Sam. So Sam, Jill, and then Judy.
So thank you for letting us ask questions. I have two. One is, although I'm sure many of you folks at NRCM are using AI in various useful ways in your personal work and maybe also for NRCM. But I'm curious if the organization has talked about possible really innovative uses in accomplishing your goals more effectively on climate change and other environmental issues. And then just the second one was a quick one, I think. I know that some of us have gotten caught where we wished we had purchased a little more community solar a few years ago because now we have EVs and so forth. So I was just wondering, I think that was tied up fixing the language of a previous bill that might make it possible to get net energy billing on more than one account if you purchase a solar share in a. So those are my two questions. Thank you. I'll get off here.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Sam. I think to your first question about like NRCM's internal use, we actually have stood up sort of a working group internally to talk about our policies. I think there's a lot of things to consider. We pride ourselves on being doing evidence-based work, and so the use of AI for research is something that we would want to, approach just cautiously from the sense of wanting to make sure that we're not taking what it gives us without without verification. Also, things around using AI generated images and other things is something we'll be um, determining what a sort of organizational policy is. But we haven't come to any conclusions on that yet. But yeah, we're definitely looking at it. On the second one, I believe the fix for the issue that you're describing, which is included in a bill LD 1966, which Representative Sophie Warren sponsored, and has is in they would go to the House first. I'm not totally sure if it's gotten a vote yet. I haven't looked in the past few days and things have been moving quickly. But if you want to track that down, that's the bill number that you'd be looking for.
All right. Jill, go for it.
Yeah, hi, thank you for all of this. So my ears really perked up when I heard you say this is the biggest capital expenditure for infrastructure since the railroads of the late 19th century. One of the most interesting classes I took in law school was about how the effect of the building of the railroads changed our law in ways that took sometimes decades to undo and make better for people because the courts were behind, let's get these railroads built. We all need them. So when I heard the president say this in the State of the Union address, and when I hear other discussions about the investors in these data centers building grid and supplying electricity, what I wonder is, will they then be regulated at the same level that a utility is regulated? Because if they're not, we're sort of allowing them to do things that we traditionally regulate businesses at a kind of a higher level standard without that oversight. So there's legal consequences to allowing this to happen, is what I'm saying. And I'm wondering if that's part of what the council will also be considering.
Yeah, that's that's interesting. I think that because the from the electricity side, the the data centers for the most part are going to be customers, not service providers. That is, they're more likely to be considered like a big industrial customer, like a manufacturing facility or a paper mill, which also sometimes have on-site generation, right? Like the some of the big mills have, cogeneration plants or biomass plants or other natural gas plants or other things. Um, and I think when we talk about building infrastructure, I think what we have in mind is a require. So the standard practice for electricity grid infrastructure and who pays for it is that if you're a power generator, then you have to pay for access to the grid, right? It's like access to the market to sell your product. If you're a power consumer, then the utility company pays to provide it to you with the understanding that through rates, through the additional electricity that you use, eventually you'll pay for that investment as a whole, right? Like it's the everyone gets connected and then everyone pays together collectively for the cost of the infrastructure. The the real risk in for AI is that they require such large amounts of infrastructure and they have so much capital behind them that it may not make sense to even have that short-term impact of raising those rates to pay for it, to help pay for everything. And it's especially risky because like the railroad boom led to the panic of 1873, right? Like it's like there was direct, like boom and bust implication, like economic implications, right? So that's really what we want to avoid. And so our suggestion is there should be a unique rate class for these folks where they have to pay for their own way and maybe even required to like actually write a check for the substation, for example, or the upgrades to the transmission and distribution grid in the local area that they're in. So that ratepayers are just like blanket held harmless from any of that infrastructure cost. And our expectation really is that because these are some of the biggest companies in the history of the world, Kat mentioned Amazon, and they're in such a big rush and competition that they may be able to just go ahead and pay for that if that's what they really want to do. And this is the place where they think that they can, access the right sites and the right broadband infrastructure and other things that they need to have. So, and that's just one requirement. There should be a number of other ones, but I think from that case, that's kind of what we're thinking about, if that makes sense. But I don't anticipate that they would be regulated as their own utility unless they somehow were like supplying a set of customers. But I don't totally know the answer to that. So I would sort of beg off on that question, but it's not my expectation.
There were a lot of ways in which little people, from workers to small towns to all kinds of stuff, they really got screwed with the railroads. And it was partly because the law changed. It wasn't just one event. That's what I'm saying is that they're going to have to
Mhm.
keep an eye on all that too. The kind of breaks. It's not just tax breaks, it's also legal and liability breaks that get baked into these kind of things. And when things go belly up, who pays?
Totally. I just wanted to flag, Jack had mentioned kind of the first of our four kind of key criteria that we included in our testimony on LD 307. I included the blog that we wrote about our considerations for AI data center development in the chat. And there are three other considerations that we also included. You can also read our full testimony online, but just wanted to direct folks to that as a resource. Judy has been very patient. Judy, go for it with your question.
Well, thank you for letting me talk. We are not talking about how we can't say no to these data centers. I don't want them. AI, I feel, is a stock bubble. I believe it's going to bust. And we have not talked about, we're in drought, water use. Nobody's talking about water use. We had problems with living here last year. Our wells will dry up. We don't want them. We need to fight these oligarchs. We're just saying, fix it nice and make it legal. There's going to be, like the lawyer said, there's going to be so many legal issues. A data center built close to you may really change how your home is even dealt with, or something, or your well. I mean, I really feel like we don't have a platform to say no.
Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective, Judy. And was also a question from Jean in the chat that I wanted to maybe loop in here, which is address the potential heat pollution and impacts on water, which isn't something that we've talked about quite as much relative to how the energy use we've
The
talked
water
about.
issue, there's no way. They can't bring water out of the sky, can't.
Jack, do you want to take that one on?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that it's one of the reasons why we're supportive of LD 307. I mean, I think sort of putting a hold on these projects sort of right away is going to be important to do. And I think we haven't really had the ability as the time as a state to have a detailed conversation about what all the potential impacts are and what how we might address them
You're right. You're
or
right.
or how we they may not be able to be addressed, right? So
Exactly.
there may be cases where we do want to, as you mentioned, just say this is not
No.
an appropriate kind of development for Maine. And I think our hope is that the council's deliberations, and again, there is a seat we don't know who's going to get seated on that. The bill hasn't passed yet, but there is a seat on there for a environmental nonprofit. So
Mhm.
we don't know who's will be sitting in that seat, but those are the kinds of issues that I expect to come up. And because that council will be somewhat open in their work, regardless, we're expecting to provide input into the work of the council and sort of share what we think are appropriate considerations. And honestly, hope you all do too. We can definitely follow up as that that comes forward and they sort of accept public input into their deliberations.
Yeah, and I'll just add to this that I think you've seen like piecemeal opposition in certain places. Like there was a large city council vote in Lewiston that took place where a lot of local folks came out and expressed opposition to a certain proposal for a data center in their community. I think the establishment of a pause on any development and the creation of a council enables the state to really consider whole scale and not rely on these local communities to be the sole obstacles to these large development proposals. So it's sort of taking the onus not off of the hands of local communities, but just ensuring that communities aren't taken advantage of and that we're assessing really thoroughly all of these options that are coming in, regardless of where they're located. Sarah, go for it.
I think I'm there. Here. Thank you, everybody, thank you, NRCM, for hosting, rather. I just wanted to kind of throw something that I've been thinking about out there to get your reaction. I am glad that you're working on LD 307. I think I'm concerned with the rapid pace of technology developing and our policies being able to keep up with that for all kinds of reasons for AI. But I also feel like it's here. I mean, I feel Judy too, but I feel like it's already here. And my concern is that if we say no to all of them here, like it feels very NIMBY to me. Like I think the state of Maine is like their data centers in Virginia or something. So I worry that the increased use of AI is here, and that if we don't build these things here in the right way with environmental justice controls and all the other things, that they're just going to get shipped off to another state that maybe doesn't have those, and then those communities are impacted. So can you help me know how to feel about that?
Yeah, thank you for that, Sarah. And I also just wanted to, if I could wrap in a question from the chat that I think is really related, which was asked earlier in the conversation, which is, is our electricity pricing currently impacted by data centers in other states? So how does this conversation we're having in Maine interact with the regional and nationwide conversation?
Yeah, so I guess to take that second question first from the chat. Generally speaking, New England has not been the epicenter of data center development in the United States so far because the sort of beginning of the big data center development wave was looking for places where they could get electricity from the grid. And if you're getting electricity from the grid, you have to pay grid costs, and New England grid costs are higher. So there were a lot of places across the Mid-Atlantic and the Midwest where they have lower sort of per kilowatt hour power prices where they were working on that. Since there's been the interconnection queues for those data centers have gone absolutely bonkers in the past couple years, and so many of the data center developers are thinking about how do they build their own build their own energy supplies. I mean, there are truly crazy stories out there of people lining up like 600 1 megawatt diesel generators like along the back of the building. Like it's totally insane what they're talking about doing in some of these cases. And whether those projects come to pass or not, it's hard to say, right? But the lengths to which some of the developers are willing to go to get these projects online really shows this sort of like pressure to sort of deploy this capital and the potential benefits that people see out of this competition. So I think, Sarah, to your question, um, it's true, right? Like if things aren't built here, to some degree, they may be built somewhere else. I think it's a real challenge for us, as NRCM, as a state-based environmental organization. We can't really be like obligated to like take on a damaging environmental project because it might get built somewhere else. We can only really like make a choice for what makes sense for our state with everything in context, right? We and we as the climate and clean energy program at NRCM oftentimes wrestle with this issue of we need to build clean energy infrastructure, and that has local impacts. And sometimes those have local opposition in different ways. But as we balance like what are the needs that we have to address climate change and bring on the clean energy that we need, um, given that we don't live in a sort of glass sphere, right? Like it's not going to our climate's not going to stay the same if we don't move ahead with this energy transition. So these are really difficult questions, but I think we're not putting in place a ban on data centers. We are saying, look, the potential implications of these are significant, and we want to understand what those are. And are there ways that we could potentially say, if you don't significantly affect if you don't significantly affect the local environment, or you're avoiding or mitigating those concerns, if you are not creating additional greenhouse gas implications, if you are if you're able to negotiate a community benefits agreement with the local community, so that they are supportive of the project, that we the town council, this is not a perfect example, but the town council in Jay sent a letter to the legislature being like, this is like one of our big chances to like get this site redeveloped. This is like important tax revenue for the town. There's a lot of different considerations that people have, and we would say, let's figure out what the issues are and see if we can like, in good faith, try and address them. Maybe it's possible, maybe it's not. But I think you put your finger on, Sarah, the sort of like one of the fundamental tensions around any kind of development and weighing the costs and benefits. And we're always going to, our part of NRCM is always going to come to it from the sort of climate and clean energy policy perspective. If there are big developments, other parts of NRCM that are concerned about water and land use development, land use and permitting will come into play, no doubt. But each project is unique, so we sort of have to set up general guardrails, but also look at each project on its own, for its own specifics and how they propose to address all these issues. But it's not an easy thing. So thanks for the question, Sarah.
Yeah. And I really hate to bring us to a close while there are still questions in the room, but I think I'm going to have to. We are at the end of our hour here. And as I mentioned, please do reach out if you think those questions would be helpful to have us answer offline. I'm happy to be that person. So reach out to me at jcaldwell@nrcm.org. We'll send out a follow-up email with all of the information we talked about on this call and a recording of this call. And please do remember to reach out to your legislators in support of LD 307 and to pass and fund LD 1870 to pass the Climate Superfund bill in Maine. With that, I'm going to leave you all to your Thursdays. We'll see you next month, if not sooner. Have a good day, all.